the secrecy, the lack of transparency. You said you had it in your closing. You know, that was one of the contrasts you drew. And one of the big secrets of the trial was this Boland report. And now right after the verdict, there's this leak to the Associated Press that purports to be the Boland report. What did you guys think of what's been reported so far, and what impact would that have had on the trial if it had come out earlier?
What was upsetting about this, about the Boland report, is that his very essence of existence is supposed to be for transparency and to make sure that ethical obligations are followed. It's his whole job. And throughout the course of this trial, we find out that he prepared a report, but instead of undertaking his duties and responsibilities to do exactly that, be transparent and be ethical and come to a conclusion so we can advance the welfare of athletes, he sought the advice of counsel and hid behind the attorney-client privilege. Penn State sought the advice of counsel. And apparently he says, I don't believe for one moment, Mr. Integrity, who has no integrity, he claims that he then undertook his investigation at the direction of counsel. And Judge Dowling, and maybe properly so, we followed his order, he ruled that under the attorney-client privilege, his investigation was subject to non-disclosure. So we didn't have the benefit of that report at all. Now we're finding out after the trial, we knew it existed because he disclosed that his findings to Dr. Lynch, but we don't know what's in the report, and it was done at the direction of counsel. I don't know how reliable it is.
So, and you made the point, Doctor, that you're not even sure if this was the original report that got leaked. I mean, explain what you think of it. This leak.
Timing is interesting.
Right.
They did all they could to hide it for 5 years, and then all of a sudden the trial ends and it comes out. You have to remember, if we got a hold of it before the trial ended, then we get to have all the drafts that were done up to that and all his notes of the investigation to go with it. So now that the trial's over, suddenly the report comes out with none of the background that's supposed to go with it. That AP reporter called me and talked to me, and he told me that he's friends with Bob Boland. When he was interviewing me, he said Bob did not give him the report. He didn't say who gave it to him. We saw in the trial that Bob was less than honest, and he was talking to me on his wife's phone, so maybe Bob let his wife disclose it or gave it to a friend to disclose it. We just don't know.
What do you think the motive is of putting the report out now? Is there anything you can draw on?
Well, the article sort of alluded that it wasn't that bad, but I kind of disagree with that as well. The standard that AP reporter tried to use and what Charmel tried to use was the standard of Franklin putting a player in that wasn't medically cleared. That's not the standard. The standard is them trying to bully the medical staff into changing decisions. That's not appropriate. If I don't give in and then he doesn't put the player in, that can't happen, because there are people out there who will give in. And as a medical community, we have to admit that there are some people who give in. Every doping scandal in the world, every major doping scandal in the world has been physician organized. So we have to acknowledge that sometimes we're less than perfect as well. So the standard can't be Franklin put someone in. The standard needs to be coaches have to stop trying to influence decisions.
What would the impact have been if that came out during the trial, this leak, the Boland report? Could that have been a mistrial, or what do you think could have happened?
It would depend on what the report said. Mm-hmm. If it was disclosed and it was favorable to us, I probably wouldn't move for mistrial. Mm-hmm. But then the question is, well, why was it disclosed? And there would be some legal challenges with regard to that. But it may not have had any impact. Depends on what the findings are. And I'm suggesting that the findings probably aren't reliable. If it was done by Boland at the direction of counsel, And council has to know they have to have to disclose that report to the trustees. The findings aren't going to be reliable.
Do you think the Bolin report, the fact that it was kept to be this big secret, you know what I mean, and it was referenced throughout the trial, but then there'd be an objection, or something, did that put in the mind of the jury that they were hiding something? In other words, did the secrecy of the Bolin report work against the defense?
In my opinion, yes.
And you drew that out at the end. You drew that out, that this is the cover-up on this side and this is the transparency on this side.
Common sense and sensible thinking would suggest if it was favorable, they would disclose it. They would have put it on the billboard. So common sense would suggest if you draw the inference, it was negative to them. It was adverse to them.
And the jury saw that, you think?
I don't know what's in the mind of the jury, but that was the inference they should have drawn. A reasonable person would have drawn that conclusion, in my mind, based on the evidence. But we don't know what's in the report. We don't know. And we don't know if it was sanitized. We don't know what Baldwin wrote, gave to the lawyers, and then the lawyers probably sanitized it. I suspect that's what happened.
All right. And moving on after, go ahead.
So the other thing is, the jury heard essentially the same information Bob Bolden got. Same witnesses, pretty much the same everything. They made a very different conclusion than what's reported in the Bolden report. And that, in our opinion, perfectly so.
And their conclusion and all of the information they got is now public. So what does that mean to you?
That's what I wanted. Things have to change. That's my goal.
And in the days since the verdict, what's life been like? What are you hearing from people? Negative, positive? I mean, what has changed so far that you can tell?
I have not gotten one negative comment. People at work have come up to me and given me hugs, saying that you did the right thing. We know it wasn't about the money for you. It was about trying to do the right thing and protect the kids. I hear that over and over and over.
How comfortable is it, though, knowing that you sued your employer? And I don't know if that Dr. Black is still your supervisor or not.
No, he's not.
Okay. But at the time, when you filed the suit, he was, right? And a
Yes.
friend. Yeah.
Yes.
How comfortable or uncomfortable was that?
I don't think about that kind of stuff. I just know what's the right thing to do, is to protect the kids. Whatever happened to me, happened to me. I wasn't worried about that.
And going back to work, you were in surgery today, right?
Yes.
So is it back to normal at work, or what's different?
Yeah, other than people coming up and they tell me congratulations. That's my response always is, well, the congratulations should be to the student athletes, not to me.
Right. And one of the recommendations which you put forward, in some of the correspondence you had after your dismissal, were the 10 recommendations, and there was a lot of back and forth at the trial about those. But of those, what is there any way to get any action on any of those? I guess is my question.
I guess we'll find out. Steve and I haven't had a lot of time to sit down and strategize on where we go from here yet.
But one of the key ones was that you think in every athletic department there has to be sort of describe what was the key part of that recommendation. Describe this.
So similar to the drug testing program,
Yeah.
there needs to be independent oversight, independent from the universities, so that someone like Bob Bolin can't go as an employee of the university, go to counsel at the university to cover everything up. There has to be someone outside of the university who monitors all that stuff.
But that person would be around the program, though.
Yes, so they'll be embedded at the university, but employed by somebody else. And the university will pay out to have that person hired and be there.
And it would be what, NCAA? Would it be, or like Big Ten, or what would be the entity, you think?
I don't think the NCAA or the Big Ten can do it either.
Okay.
They're also in a conflict of interest because they're making tons of money.
Okay.
So there's a company called Drug Free Sport that runs the drug testing program. It's a separate entity. You get contracted by the NCAA, and they also do the Big Ten, to come in and do the drug testing program. So there's a completely independent body that does not beholden to the university or the NCAA. They could kind of cancel the contract, of course, but in terms of the workings of how everything's done, it's independent.
And that person would be, like, you talked about the weekly stuff that would happen. You'd have your injury list, you'd have the questions and answers from the coach and the doctor. How would this be different with this independent person there? Like, what would be happening?
This independent person would not take care of any of the athletes.
Right.
So they, again, remove that conflict of interest. Their role is oversight, to go talk to the physicians, talk to the coaches, talk to the players. They would be in charge of hiring and firing of the medical staff, so that's all independent, and try to remove as best you can. It can never be totally removed, but try to remove the conflict of interest as best you can.
So even though that medical staff of the team would be employed by the university, this person would have sort of hiring and firing power.
Correct.
Over that. Okay.
That's my idea. So,
Okay.
You know, these are all ideas that can be tweaked.
Right.
If someone will ever have a conversation with me about it.
What? There was a little bit of talk, of retirement, at the trial too. Where do you go from here? Like, you were talking about how tough it's been to build back the practice after having so much work tied to the Penn State program, and then trying to get all of those sort of surgeries back up online.
Yep.
What's ahead for you personally?
I haven't had time to sit down and think through all that yet. So I'm not sure. I've talked about retiring, loosely for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people my age do. So, but I got to sit down, talk to Steve, and talk to my wife.
And you turned 63 the night of the verdict came in, right?
Correct.
Wow.
I told her I can't wait to see how she tops it next year.
Oh, right, yeah, that was
A lot of
some
pressure.
party. What did you guys do after the verdict? Was there, given that it was your birthday and that you won the case, was there a big party or what?
No.
What happened?
Just
Had a beer.
Yep.
had some food and
Goodness.
beer. Local pub there.
There's this statement out from Penn State Health about a possible appeal. Is there anything idea what that could look like, or what they would try to appeal?
Judge Dowling ran a very clean trial, I thought. He was efficient, he was fair, he made rulings on both sides, for and against us, for and against them. I thought he was very clean. I don't see any significant appellate issues at all. It's always a threat by everyone who's disgruntled with the verdict. I thought he ran a very clean, efficient trial. He was a very fair judge. No complaints.
And there was this constant motion, though, about trying to just say that it didn't meet the standard of the law, the at-will employee, the exceptions or stuff like that. Was that just perfunctory defense going through the motions there, or what was that all about?
I don't think their arguments had any merit, but this cause of action is very unique, and it's very limited in Pennsylvania. So, what this lawsuit has done, it has established that the standard of care for a doctor who manages collegiate athletes now includes making sure that their medical decisions aren't interfered with a judge. The NCAA guidelines and the Big Ten rules, those are rules that apply to some private organization, like the National Rifle Association or Milkmaids Association. NCAA, they're private organizations. That's not Pennsylvania law. This case established Pennsylvania law.
Which
That's the difference.
the standard of care.
Standard of care now includes not allowing a medical judgment to be interfered with by a coach. That's the standard of care now in Pennsylvania. That's the law.
Because
And
of this case.
if you adversely affect someone, a doctor who does that, it creates now a cognizable cause of action, and we call it an employment action. That's what this case established. Very important. First one in the nation. That's why it's so important. The NCAA standards now have become Pennsylvania law.
Oh, so that was sort of an NCAA rule that you couldn't
Right.
interfere,
That's not Pennsylvania policy. That's
Right.
not Pennsylvania policy.
and that's something you couldn't sue on.
Can't
either.
sue on it. It's
Right.
not Pennsylvania policy.
Okay.
Now, it is recognized, even though not verbatim. In theory, it's recognized as Pennsylvania law. That's why this case is so important.
Do you think now that this is established, we're going to see more suits regarding this?
Well, this case is a very unique fact pattern. But if another medical provider suffers an adverse consequence, consequence, because they followed the standard of care when they're dealing with collegiate athletes, we have a precedential cause of action. It could be a cognizable claim, at least in Pennsylvania will be. Other states, they all have their own different rules and regulations and their own common law. So I don't know how it would be in other states, but the theory is proper. This is a part of now Pennsylvania public policy that implicates the important public policy of public health, welfare, and safety. That's why it's so important.
Okay, I like that. In terms of having everything come out that came out, and you did promise fireworks and you delivered, what's the damage to Penn State brand as a result of this? I mean, you had 2 cases of doctors being fired sort of at the coach's behest. You know what I mean? I mean, that was pretty well established, I thought. Now the fact pattern wasn't the same for Sebastianelli. It wasn't because he was clashing over player decisions and medical treatments, but it was sort of the coach wanted him out, so he was gone.
So my opinion has been,
Yeah, both.
I closed on the football team in 1946, where Steve Suey, the lineman of the Penn State, the captain of the Penn State football team, they refused to play without their African American players against segregated Mississippi. And he said, "We are one. We are Penn State." They stood for dignity. They stood for principle. They stood for integrity, just like him. We stand for integrity. If you're blue and white, if you're part of the nation, you stand for integrity. You stand for principle. You stand for honesty. You stand for transparency. You stand for what Dr. Lynch represents. You don't stand for what Hershey represented in that trial. They can't claim that we are. We can. That's the difference. That's the brand.
And you think you reminded Penn Staters who might just say, well, this is creating, a bad look for the site. You reminded them, hey, the integrity is more important. Do you think this trial reminds them?
If you're going to claim blue and white, you're going to claim you're part of the nation, you're going to claim we are Penn State, yes, integrity first.
Dr. Lynch, your thoughts on how this reflected on Penn State, something near and dear to you?
As I said in my trial, it's yes and no. The people on the other side of the courtroom, they're not Penn State. The people in the trenches, people I work with every day, it's that Penn State Health, the same thing. The people in the trenches, the people who come up to me and say thank you. The athletic trainers who are ecstatic that I did this to help them. That's Penn State and Penn State Health. It's not the bureaucrats and the lawyers. They're screwing it all up. And, we are is people in the trenches doing the work, the hard work. One of my good friends, I won't tell you his name, he's worked at Penn State for 40 years. He now says we need to get back to the upper level people doing transparency and the same thing.
And you thought that lesson was learned during the Sandusky episode, and you had this integrity office that was born of that scandal, yet it didn't work here. Does that lead to...
Well, it was actually exactly the opposite. What happened is they figured out they could use that integrity officer position to hide things. they didn't actually have to keep it after the Sandusky sanctions went away.
The consent decree.
They decided to keep it, and then they used it to cover up things. That's why Bob Bowlen ran to the attorneys right away, not to do the job he was supposed to do. He used that position to hide information. I mean, think about that. How sick is that?
Will you ever be able to enjoy it like you used to? You know, the whole Penn State experience of being an alumni, of being a former athlete, of being, you know, a national champion wrestler for the Nittany Lions.
If they start doing the right thing and be transparent, and if the administration starts to do that, yeah. I love Penn State. It changed my life. I wouldn't be where I'm at without Penn State. So it's the people in the trenches and doing the hard work.
And I know you had the athletes foremost in this thing from the beginning. Two high-profile athletes sort of came up for Franklin. Do you think in time you'll hear from more athletes, you know, about what you did?
I've already heard from some.
Okay. So it's just, you know, it's one of these things where they'll come to you, but they might not want to sit on a witness stand.
Yeah, it's hard. What Rob Windsor did took an amazing amount of courage to go against, you know, school like us. I mean, it was hard for us. Rob Windsor didn't have anything to gain by doing that, personally. He wants them again to do the right thing.
And Steve, do you think other people who might have something that is amiss at Penn State, they might come to you to help them out? Or like, what are you sort of developing a reputation of somebody who can go against Penn State and win?
I don't know if I can comment on that. I did my job in this case, but like Dr. Lynch said, you know, I'm a Penn State athlete. You know, I went to Penn State on an athletic scholarship. I was a gymnast. And I was on the national team, and it didn't please me. You know, when I got called upon to do this, I had to think through it long and hard. But I'm with him. Integrity first. And when he says it wasn't hard to sue his employer, he's being very modest. Difficult to make a choice to sue and potentially hurt things that we love, things that change our lives, change tradition. That takes a lot of tremendous courage. He's being modest.
As always. Well, guys, I really appreciate your time on this, and I like how we put it into a personal perspective, but also that legal perspective of the ground that was broken on this case in terms of standard of care.
It is groundbreaking. You're right. That's a good way to describe it.
I want to share one other thing. You know, we just touched the surface of how many kids were affected by this. I had a player send me a text after Dr. Seidenberg talked about the suicide issue, and he wanted to know if that was about him. And it was not about him, but there's many other things that have happened that have not come to light.
Could I tell my story?
Sure, absolutely.
So I tutored student athletes at the Morgan Center while he was there, and I tutored football players, track athletes, lacrosse, everybody. And when we found out he was being removed from his job, I decided I wasn't going to stay and tutor any longer. So I told my students I'm not going to be back. And one of my football players said, "Why not?" And I told him because my husband was being removed as the team doctor and medical director, and he said, "Oh, well," and he said, "Well, why?" And I said, "Well, they said it's because he doesn't live in State College, but we think it's because he wouldn't give in to coach demands." And he said, "Oh, I can speak to that." He said, "I had walking pneumonia. I was spitting up blood. Coaches made me go to class and made me come to practice every day. And they said, whatever you do, don't go see Dr. Lynch or Dr. Seidenberg."
Wow.
So that was a starting player.
So some of the players knew what was going on.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times with the Stars, it seems like Franklin put on a caring face for them, even though he's saying, you know, to you, get them on the field.
Sometimes.
Right.
People are afraid to come forward, especially if they want to stay in the football world. They're afraid of being blackballed.
Well, hey, maybe this opens up something, you know, of a positive.
That's my goal.